Hello, good morning, everyone. We're going to start now. So, thank you for joining us today and welcome to our first installment of the Embracing the Unnormal webinar series. In today's topic, we will focus on Indonesian sentiments, helping your consumers regain control. I'm Iza. I'm the Strategy Director at Illuminate Research Asia. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. First and foremost, please ensure your audio is muted. The presentation will take approximately about 30 minutes, and this will be followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. You can use your chat feature to send me your question directly to me, and I will read out your questions, and Dawn will answer the questions. We will send you the link for today's webinar after the session, together with a PDF copy of the presentation. Now, before we start, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce Illuminate. We are a strategy insight consultancy. We combine traditional market research and the latest methodologies to uncover both the conscious and non-conscious drivers of consumer behavior. Some of the methods that we use include neuromarketing, ethnography, and semiotics. At Illuminate, we view everything through cultural lens, using cultural insights and semiotics to identify changes and trends as they begin. Now, the current COVID-19 pandemic that has turned the whole world upside down triggered our passion to look closely into how this global crisis has changed the lives of the Indonesian consumers. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. She's none other than the President Director of Illuminate Research Asia, Dawn Herdman. Dawn is no stranger to the research community in Indonesia as well as in the region. Dawn has been in the insights business for more than 2 decades with a career spanning across Australia, Europe, and Asia. She founded Illuminate Research Asia in Jakarta in 2011. And Dawn is also on board of the British Chamber of Commerce, or BRICHAM in Indonesia. And she is also a regular speaker at regional and global conferences. So now, without further ado, over to you, Dawn.
Okay, thank you, Isa, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen and take you through some of the research that we've been doing recently. 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can see that clearly. Okay, as Isa mentioned, the global pandemic has really affected how people's lives, or how people live their lives. And we've seen the changes in a very short period of time. Lots of things have changed. And as Isa mentioned, at Illuminate Asia, we were really curious. We really wanted to understand how people are coping and adapting at this time. And we also wanted to help our clients make sense of it all and to figure out how they should move forwards and what they should be doing at this time. So therefore, we've conducted some of our own research. First of all, we joined a global collaborative called Not Everyday Life. This is a collaborative across 42 countries in the world, and it's basically a qualitative initiative. So there's been a total of 323 in-depth interviews conducted across the world. We were involved in research in Asia Pacific, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. And this is an ongoing initiative. So we've just wrapped up phase 1, and we will continue conducting interviews and analyzing at a local, regional, and global level. We've also conducted a series of focus group discussions in Indonesia about the topic of COVID-19. Just before we start, just a little bit of information. In Indonesia, we did 13 in-depth interviews, and this is across demographics and regions, so not just in Jakarta. We talked across social classes, and we also conducted 2 focus groups. Now, in the Southeast Asia region, there was an additional 17 in-depth interviews in Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines. But for today, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the Indonesian perspective. I might do some small comparisons with learnings in the region where and as relevant. But just as a little background, as I mentioned, we talked to, in Indonesia, upper class, middle class, and lower class. Upper class, for example, we had engineers, doctor, general manager, student. What we really found with these guys, or this group, was that they're very compassionate. A lot of compassion is being shown at the moment for underprivileged. The middle social class, for example, lecturer, a member of the army, they're very well informed segment, but they're really concerned about how long this might go on for. And finally, the lower class. We spoke with masseuse, taxi driver, maid, Gojek driver, and so on. And they're very concerned about their current financial conditions. So the pandemic and the ensuing lockdown has really represented a loss of control for many people. So routines have been disrupted, changes are happening fast, there's a level of confusion and underlying kind of fear and uncertainty for the future. So this has been a very distressing situation for many people. And what we see is that the coping mechanisms and the adjusted behavior that we're seeing coming out of this is really a way for consumers to take back the control that they need. Some of these behaviors we see are conscious, some are not conscious. But today we want to take you through some of the anxieties and fears, and then also some ways that, that consumers are taking back control. And then finally, I'll talk through what this means for brands and what you can be thinking of and doing in these times. Okay, so first of all, focusing on Indonesians' fears and anxieties. And we see it's been impacted on many different levels. Many are concerned about the impact now, but also in the long term in the future. They feel out of control in the current situation. You know, there's not a lot that people can do about what's happening in the economy or the number of cases across the country. So what I'm going to do is take you through each one of these areas, and you'll see that we've mapped them here on axes. So on the x-axis, we have personal and versus community focus. So these are the areas, obviously, on the left are looking at what is more about the community, about the togetherness, about the people in the society. And on the right, more about internal, more about personal. And then on the y-axis, I've got functional versus emotional. So, you know, what are the functional struggles versus what are the kind of more internal emotional struggles? Okay, so if we start on a personal and functional level, on a practical level, there's many concerns. So first of all, economic uncertainty. So there's a lower earning power. So people have either lost their jobs, or some people are on lowered job hours or lower earning power. There's less of a way to make an income. And this is really impacting on people. They're struggling to make ends meet. They're concerned about how they're gonna put food on the table for their families and pay the other expenses. There is threats over job security as well. So those who are still earning are concerned what might happen in the future. And concern over rising prices. So what happens if prices keep going up, or what happens if it gets worse? The second one is a fear of getting sick. So this is at a very functional level, is what happens if I get sick? What if I get the virus or my family? How can I stop this from happening? So obviously there's concern around the hygiene. So yes, we need more hygiene. How can I ensure that I'm doing hygiene practice properly? And am I doing enough? For some, there's a fear around leaving the house. So if I leave the house, will I catch the virus? If I leave the house, maybe I'm a carrier, I don't know, of the virus, and I might infect somebody else. And then the third one is digital divide. So access to technology. So what we see here is, in some instances, there's inequitable access. So not everybody has the same access to technology. For example, we hear from our consumers that the elderly, some of the elderly are struggling to have access, to understand how to use technology. In some instances, some people don't have as much access to internet data, either for monetary reason or depending on where they are located. There's also frustrations around technology. So, you know, we've all had to adapt to a new way of living. And for a lot of people, this means learning new ways to do things with technology. And sometimes there are hiccups. Sometimes things don't work as well as we would hope. So that's also a frustration. And then finally, a mistrust of online shopping for some people. So are they going to get the right products that they ordered? Are they going to be able to pay properly? How is this going to work? Okay, so if we look at more of a personal and emotional level, here we've seen that the uncertainty, social isolation, and this immense fast change has really had a strong impact on the mental health of Indonesians. So I think this is a topic that we're hearing more about in social media, and even on the traditional media. First of all, there's a loss of freedom. So there's this idea of cabin fever. I can't leave. I'm stuck in the one place. I don't have an option. There's boredom that's arising. What do I do in these four walls? How do I cope? Especially at this time in Ramadan, there is this inability to pray or to worship as they normally would. So they're not able to go to the mosque. So that is also causing a distress at this time. And then finally, the blurring of spaces. So what I mean by this is that, it's no longer you go out to the office, you come back to the house, you go take your kids to school. There's kind of this overlap happening here. The home has become the space for everything, basically. So there is also a feeling of inadequacy and loss of purpose here. So for some people, they're talking about a feeling of lack of commitment and discipline. They feel demotivated or useless in the scenario. Very emotionally drained. There's so much going on. There's so many things to consider and think about. And also a feeling for some people about inadequacy of new roles. So what comes to mind for me here is particularly the parents who are struggling to deal with working. A lot of them will be working, they're caregiving, but they're also now teachers. They might also now be the primary shopper or the primary person looking after the cleaning of the house and so on. And this all kind of pulls together to a decline of mental health overall. So there's a feeling of being overwhelmed. So our consumers we spoke to talk about, there's just so much going on, so much out of the control, so many uncertainties. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how we can make a difference to this. So, and this uncertainty brings a lot of stress. And there's a low threshold for disruption. So what we mean here is that, it could be just one small thing that could be the tipping point that really makes people kind of have even more struggles with mental health. And finally, time management struggles. So we hear a lot from consumers or from respondents who are talking about how do they decompartmentalize the time of their day. So yes, they're a parent, they're a teacher, they're a homekeeper. How do they get up and say, okay, now is time for this and now is time for that? Some of the people who are still working full time talk about having a longer or harder workload because of doing it remotely. There's extra hurdles to jump through. When we look at the fears and anxieties on a community and emotional level, really social distancing and lockdown creates some real tensions here. So on the one hand, there's a loss of connection. So there's a loss of real connection or physical connection. So as we'll see when I talk about how consumers are coping, we see people are doing video calls, they're connecting on social media and in other ways, but there's a real desire to meet in person. There's a feeling that nothing beats that face-to-face, that personal contact, the physical interaction with other people. And there's a fear of changing social structures. So even though, as we will see, there are people who are switching face-to-face interactions or groups like Arisan or Quran reading groups, they're switching that to an online method or a virtual method. But there's a fear that maybe the structures, these are the groups that really support them on a personal level. And maybe there's a change in that and that might continue to change. On the right-hand side here, we see household tensions. So for those who are living within the household, we see there are tensions arising. So there's arguments occurring. I remember we had one of our consumers, a housewife, saying, you know what, I love my husband, I love my spouse, but they're with me all the time now, 24/7. I need a break. I need some space. And I think the same goes for the kids, as for having kids around as well. So there's this lack of space and boundaries because everything's happening within the one household. And as I mentioned before about the balancing of roles, so parents especially, but even non-parents have different roles that they need to now partake within the one space as well. And people are really struggling with that. We hear this a lot from housewives, especially about, providing for the family, cooking more, housework and so on. And then finally, if we look at a community and a functional level, there's real concerns over the way authority figures have handled the pandemic so far. So we're seeing a lack of trust in authority. So I think especially early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of inconsistent messaging. There's a lot of lack of transparency, even down to, some of the early discussions around whether COVID had arrived in Indonesia or not, and so on. There's a sense that there was a little bit too little too late. There's a lack of action, and there's some unfilled expectations there amongst some of the consumers that we spoke to. And then finally, we see a concern around chaos and discrimination. So I think there's a fear that this pandemic will further divide society. And I think, we've seen in the media some instances where this is happening. There has been some racial discrimination already. There have been instances of discrimination when there has been a death with COVID and around the burials and situation. So we can see some of that stuff has been kind of bubbling away a little bit already, but I think there's a concern that it might grow into something bigger. And there's also an underlying concern of social unrest, particularly around the issue of the economic situation. If it continues further, what's going to happen, and could there be some other problems around social unrest there? So how do Indonesians cope, and how do they start to regain some control? Now, as everybody knows, Indonesians have always been very resilient. Obviously Indonesia is a country that has suffered for natural disasters. Even the flooding that happens in most years in Jakarta is one example. Yeah, so we see Indonesians are always highly resilient. They always have a lot of energy and focus to get through a bad situation, and particularly to get through a situation together. And I think that's part of the cultural framework or the cultural backdrop to Indonesia. But I think we see it more so even now as well. So when we start looking at and trying to map out some of these things, you remember we had the axes before that we mapped out some of these anxieties and tensions. So I wanted to see if can we look at how they're starting to regain some control in these situations. So you can see that we've mapped out across each of these 4 quadrants again. And I'm going to talk you through each one of these and give you as many examples as possible of how Indonesians are coping. Okay, so first and foremost, I think overwhelmingly, the enabler to cope is the enhanced use of technology. So it's really permeating across all aspects of our new lives. So many people have been forced to adapt to the new technology, even those who were less accustomed to. So we hear stories of consumers, elderly consumers who are being helped by their younger family members to use technology to learn and adapt. We see school students, we hear about lecturers who are learning to adapt and do things online. We see new ways of working, not just those of us who work in offices. We see new ways of working amongst even street sellers. One example we have is street seller who is, a vegetable seller who used to go door to door and is now using a WhatsApp, building kind of a database or a network on the WhatsApp and using that as a way to take orders and to do the deliveries. So what we do find as well is online shopping and home delivery has also dramatically increased. And I think what's important here is the trust in these channels is also increased as well. And as I mentioned before, there's new opportunities for remote working, learning, socializing, worshiping. So, having Zoom or Skype or Messenger or whatever it is, catch-ups, video calls with friends, having worship via a virtual medium, and so on. Okay, so first of all, we saw one of the tensions was around the economic uncertainty. So what we see here, and we have actually a video, if you look on our social media, you'll find this on our LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter. You'll see that we have this interview with this Gojek driver. And this is one example. So he's saying he offers new services. So out of his own initiative, he's gone out and he's offered services like laundry, like doing a monthly shopping, to help people, but also to help himself. So we find new business models like this occurring, people looking for other forms of income. We find that consumers are more careful on spending, trying to save a little bit, if possible, or where possible, not spending on anything that's unnecessary. So again, being very careful. And we do see people digging into their personal savings and or relying on community or relative assistance, especially those on the lower social classes. One area of concern you remember was the hygiene and the virus itself. So here we see extra steps and rituals undertaking. So more hand washing, more showering, mask, hand sanitizer, and so on. We see that antibacterial brands are becoming more critical. So people are switching the products and the brands that they used to use for this. And household cleanliness as well. So the consumers are telling us that they're disinfecting their homes more. They're cleaning products when they're bringing it in from a shopping or something's delivered. Okay, during the pandemic, we also see that people are seeking more solace from religion. So they're more disciplined. They have more time to perform different religious practices. So it's seen as a way to seek inner peace and to build a stronger relationship with God. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some tensions arising around this idea of the duty for the religion conflicting against the need for social distancing. Now, interestingly enough, some of the comments we got was one particular group was struggling more, perhaps, and that was the elderly. So this is people saying that they're struggling to explain or to get their parents-in-law, whatever it might be, to stay at home and not go and to the mosque or go and worship. And I think some of the interviews we did before the Mudik ban was announced, and I think at that stage people were quite conflicted about what they should do. They really wanted to go on Mudik, but they also had heard and were starting to understand about the importance for social distancing. Another area I talked a lot about a few minutes ago was mental health. So this is particularly important, I think, in these times. And as I mentioned, it's become a real topic of conversation. So firstly, about managing mental well-being, avoiding negative emotions. So it's quite interesting. We've seen there's new acceptable forms of escapism and recreation. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one example would be, we had a consumer who said, I would never, before pandemic, I would never use TikTok because it's very tacky. It's not something that is for me or my group or my friends. But now, since they've been in lockdown in a social distancing situation, they're using TikTok quite often. And it's as a form of entertainment, a form of escaping, as something to do. Another example of a recreation is shopping. Actually, we've seen that online shopping has become more of a hobby. And we also have seen that that even a small excursion out to the supermarket or to the convenience store, the mini mart, is actually seen as something of excitement, as something that can bring joy, that small outing. We see our Indonesian consumers are also wanting to avoid being overwhelmed, avoid stress wherever they can. So one example of this is limiting the news that they read in the social media. So there's a sense that when the pandemic started, everyone was checking their phones and checking all the information very frequently. And then it got to a stage for a lot of people where it just became too much and became too overwhelming for them. So they put limits for themselves. They would check at certain times of the day or check certain media and not other media, for example. One other area that we found that's a real positive is that people are showing more of an experimental mindset and are looking for opportunities to improve themselves during this time. So it's become a time of reflection, a time to learn from past mistakes, and a time, as I mentioned, to improve key aspects of their life. So one interesting thing we found is around food and beverage. People are trying new recipes, trying cooking different things, sharing what they're doing. doing stuff that they wouldn't normally do, or doing new activities with kids, for example. They're trying to stay positive, trying to accept the situation. Another one that I talked about earlier and about the anxiety and fear was maintaining connections and close relationships. So as I mentioned, technology has really been useful to help maintain connections. And some people talk about the lockdown being a positive in terms of having more quality time with the immediate family. As I mentioned, there's been a stress on close relationships. So there is a negotiation, there's a discussion happening in households about giving space when needed and how to cope in this scenario. And interestingly, we do see examples of a more equitable division of labor in the households. So this is where we see, kids jumping in and helping out, husbands doing perhaps more of the share of the workload as well. I talked earlier also about resilience around collective power. So helping others is a really key theme. Now, I'm going to jump in and compare this to some of the regional and global work that we've done as part of our global initiative. Now, we find for Indonesians, this is one area that's very strong in terms of helping others, being altruistic. On the one hand, especially those from a more privileged background, they are recognizing that they have more, and there is a real desire to help and support others. This is usually in the way of donations. It could be money or food or products, or educating people around them about hygiene or about what happens with the virus and so on. We also see that local community initiatives are really taking off. So as I mentioned, there is a bit of a disappointment in government handling from consumer perspective. And we see that local communities are jumping in to help take charge. So, for example, giving education on how to stop spread the disease. For example, we see local kampungs who are blocking off entry to people who are not based there. We also see practical support. So, people who are helping to give donations to different community groups, for example, those who are organizing for the cleaning of communal areas or the cleaning of the mosque and things like that. Okay, so the final section is, so what does this actually mean? What does this mean for brands then? How do we make sense of all of this? What's happening in the market, how consumers are coping and so on. So what I want to do is take you through 4 different areas here that we in Illuminate Asia team has considered as part of this process. Number 1 is be empathetic, take a back seat, okay? Number 2 is understand the consumer's need for control in your category. So how do you focus on that and help consumers or your customers? How do you help consumers to ease the mental burden? And how to be a good citizen? So I'm going to take you through each one of these and provide a couple of examples where relevant. So the first one is to be empathetic and take a back seat. So it's not about your brand at the moment, it's about consumers. So I think all of you or most of you will probably have seen some communications, seen some messaging from certain brands that seems to be a bit of a disconnect, seems to be out of place or leaves you feeling a little bit not pleasant, yeah? So there are some brands that have been very much about me, just talking about the brand themselves. And I think that is a really risky place to be at the moment. It can cause a lot of backlash. So first of all would be to resist the temptation to talk about yourselves. I think it's really about focusing on how you can help consumers to overcome their fear and anxiety at this point in time. I think sincerity or authenticity is really, really important here. So, you need to make sure that consumers see what your brand says as well as what your brand does. So consumers are smart. They will see through any superficial attempts to kind of exploit the pandemic. I think in this situation, tone of voice is very important. We need to see empowering, compassionate, friendly tones of voice that appears to be, optimistic if possible, not fear-mongering, so not kind of creating a sense of fear, not seen to be manipulating or capitalizing on the negative situation. And of course, it's important to stay true to brand essence. I mean, I think that goes without saying across the board. There's an example here from Aqua Danone. Some of you might have seen this. And it's for the first time we don't want you to see this billboard. So this idea of, helping consumers to stay at home, seeing a kind of a lighthearted side of things. I want to show you some examples of some questionable tactics. This is a case of social distancing logos. So some brands decided to show solidarity to the situation by modifying the logo. So you can see McDonald's, the two parts of the M have moved apart. You see Aldi again, the rings are separated. Coca-Cola has moved it apart. But I'm sure you can agree there's some risks to this strategy. It seems a bit superficial or narcissistic. It doesn't really show empathy or understanding of what people are going through. It doesn't help consumers in any way. There are examples of ads that are really getting this right, that really do empathize and do not seek to overly gain the situation. I'm going to show you one of these two ads, but we'll include the link to the other one in the document we'll send you, so you can have a look at that. On the left is an ad by Frito-Lay, and it's talking about that this is not about brands, it's about people. So it does explain about the actions they're taking to help people and support people. But it really is about kind of ad shaming other brands who are taking advantage of the situation. And then Bird's Eye, which I'll show you that in a second. And I think you'll agree that it's very empathetic tone of voice. Let me show it to you now. It's just 30 seconds.
What's for tea? It's one of the big questions at the heart of family life. But right now, we're all thinking about more than what to cook. We're all trying to live together, laugh together, and do our very best to stick together, even when we're far apart. Ed's doing their bit, as are we, helping everyone through this in whatever little ways we can. Bird's Eye.
Okay, so I think you'll agree that that's a really lovely ad. Obviously, Bird's Eye is a product which is of frozen vegetables or frozen foods. So their sales are actually doing quite well through this pandemic. But it's a really nice way to say, we understand you, we understand what you're going through. And then at the back of that, they also have on their website, they have a list of useful ideas and tips, cooking suggestions and other tips to get through the lockdown situation. Oops, sorry. Okay, the second one is understanding the consumer's need for control. Now, I just flashed this map back up here. You saw before that, consumers have ways that they're trying to regain control. How can we help them with that as a brand? First of all, it's important to understand the need for control, be present, be helpful, and play a relevant role. So think about what your brand can do to help people in the day-to-day lives. Think about what you can play, recognizing the tensions, adjust your products and services, adjust your pricing and contracts. So remember, people are feeling anxious, unsure, they've got financial concerns, they're physically confined, and think about how your brand can help people get on with their new day-to-day life. So things like giving resources, helping them navigate the daily life through whether it's parenting, teaching, cooking, all the different ways it might. Here's an example from 2009. It's Hyundai in America. At that time, it was just after the global financial crisis, and a lot of people had a difficult financial situation. So what Hyundai did was to say, if people are concerned about their financial situation, if they lost their job within 1 year, they can bring the car back and get a refund. So it was a brilliant campaign, which did very well for them. They saw an increase in market share. The next area, number 3, is help to ease the mental burden. So as we saw, mental health is increasingly important. So brands really can play a role here. So first of all, they can provide escapism and comfort. So they can help. It could be having a digital activation. It could be having some kind of digital games. They can help consumers be more experimental. It's an opportune time for brands to launch new products or new ways of using old products for consumers. Also, brands can provide simple tips about managing mental health, help promote role sharing, easing the burden across the family members. And I think don't be afraid to use the use of humor. Obviously, it needs to be sensitive. You need to be careful, but people need a laugh at the moment. So a couple of examples here. On the right-hand side, this is a brand called Emily Crisps. So this is a potato chips from the UK. Now, they'd already booked a slot for their outdoor advertising back last year. And they had, they booked it for April for when it's starting to be warm in England. Now, the pandemic happened, and instead of canceling it, they actually made some funny adverts out of this. So the top one there says something along the lines of, you know, it's only a pigeon and a runner who can see this. And the bottom one is, oh, we should have thought about TV advertising. But the interesting thing on this is that actually it's gone viral. So it's gone into the digital medium as well. And then in the middle there, it's Suama Masak Apa Hari Ini. So this is a Facebook page from Malaysia, a site for husbands to sharpen cooking skills. They have another adjacent site, which is just Masak Apa Hari Ini, where people can share their kind of cooking failures and kind of laugh at themselves a bit. And finally, number 4 is to be a good citizen. So it's really important for brands to take a more active role in community, give meaningful service here. You know, the brand is the human face of a company, so they need to play a part in society in the situation and give a positive impact for the community. But obviously it should be built around what is your brand purpose. I think it needs to be something really real and meaningful here, and it's important to be consistent. So there are some examples of some brands that have been great at talking to the external world about how they're supporting health workers, supporting frontliners and so on. But then it is leaked that internally they're not doing the right thing. They're not giving their staff paid sick leave, for example. Yeah. So I think it's important to be consistent on internal and external. And then also help consumers to help others. Yeah. So this is a time they want to help others. So I think, you know, finding a way to facilitate the local community initiatives or assist people to be altruistic, to take care of the marginalized. We have an example here from Tokopedia about together maintaining the country's economic industry. So a way to support coffee and the coffee industry during this pandemic. That's one example. But I think really how companies respond to the crisis now will help define the brand in years to come. I think just the last couple of points. I think it's important not to go dark. So now is not the time to just stop advertising or stop communicating or stop talking to your consumers. And there's a few reasons for this. One, consumers are really seeking connectivity with the brands right now, especially brands that can help them. You have a captive audience. So consumers are at home, they're going through some levels of boredom, they're engaged, they're online, they're digital. So it's a really good time to grab them and they will listen. And it's important to continue the brand messaging. And this can be reassuring in and on itself. And I have a quote there from the marketing director of Birdseye who said, "Going dark did not feel like the right thing to do. At times of uncertainty, consumers really appreciate having a consistent message." I think if a brand stops communicating during this time, there are several risks. Firstly, they're losing a golden opportunity to make a meaningful and deep relationship with their consumers. Yeah, there is also a risk of losing brand salience and brand equity, and losing association with key brand characteristics. And then also there would be a need to rebuild at a later date. And at that point, it might become all more cluttered and less engaged audience. So I think it's really important for, as brands, as marketers, that we really understand what's going on. We understand to keep talking to our consumers. We understand that we need to keep figuring out what is it that's happening with them. How do we need to talk to them? And finally, remember, of course, it's really important to be distinctive. Now, I have a little video to play here as well. It's a little bit long, so I'll skip through a little bit of it, but please feel free to go back and look at it when we send you the links. So as you watch this, you can see some of the consistent themes and codes that are coming through. It's the somber music, the piano. It's these kind of wide shots. It's about being apart. empty streets, empty areas,
When we
empty
first
spaces.
opened our doors.
Since 1926.
Since 1978. For 60 years.
For 75 years.
For over 80 years. In 90 years. Over 100 years.
It's about
Nationwide
heritage.
has been on your side.
Restaurants have always been there for you. Nissan has been with you through thick and thin. People.
People.
People and family.
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 Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Families. Families.
Families.
Today, more than ever. Today, more than ever. In times like this. At times like these. During these difficult times.
In these troubled times.
Challenging times,
Trying times.
in these times of uncertainty,
During this time of great uncertainty.
During these uncertain times.
moment in our history.
It's time of social distancing.
While things have slowed down. As we turn more inside. While the doors may be closed. While the distance between us has gotten better.
Oops. Sorry.
The more we stay apart, we still find ways to stay close, even when we're apart.
Even if we can't stand closer.
Okay, I think you get the idea, and I will hope that you can look at the full video when we send you the link. But basically, as you can see from that video, there are lots of similar codes and messages coming through here. These kind of empty spaces, the somber music, even the words in these difficult times, in these extraordinary times. We're together. We've been here a long time. So there is a risk of actually being just a me too and getting embedded in that kind of cluttered kind of messaging that we see. So we can actually help with to help you to figure out how to stand out from the clutter through our semiotics analysis frameworks. And actually that brings me to say thank you, and I hope to see you next week in the webinar, where we will be, Isa will talk a little bit about this in a second, but we will be using some of these semiotics frameworks to show you how we can analyze about the pandemic. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to any questions.
Thank you, Dawn. So now in the next 10 minutes, we will address your questions. If you have any, you can forward the questions directly to me through the chat feature. We have 2 questions already.
Okay.
So the first one is from Pim Pim. She asked, if people are more concerned about hygiene and going out, why do some people are still going out? A case in point is the McDonald's closing event at Sarina. Is it because Indonesian people are hard-headed? And the fact is, you can still see people going out to the malls as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, actually. And I meant to raise the Sarina issue as an example of what not to do for a brand, to be honest. That was the closing of the McDonald's in Sarina and having a ceremony around that. I think what we see, and I'm taking this from our from some of the interviews and the research that we've been doing, is that I think first and foremost, it seemed to take some segments of the population some time to really understand what's going on. I think for the most part, people are still concerned about hygiene. They're fearful to go out, and they're doing the right thing. Of course, in any society, in any country, there's always going to be people who go against the recommendations, and that is unfortunate. I think in the case of going to mall, of going to the McDonald's at Sarina, I think there's a few issues here. I think one, I think Indonesian people on the whole are very social and are very much about togetherness and community and being a part of something bigger. So I think it's probably, for some elements of the population, it might be more difficult to follow the rules, I guess. And I don't think but like I said, I don't think it's just about Indonesians. I'm talking to friends in different countries, and they're also having same issues and having people going places they're not supposed to, getting in trouble with the with the authorities in that instance. So it's definitely not just Indonesian.
Now, there is a question from Pim from that. At the semiotic video, the somber and gloomy feeling was shown by brands.
Yeah.
It is empathetic, but sad. So it should be should it be toned down for Indonesian?
Yeah, I think that's a good question as well. I mean, I think from that somber music, I mean, I just think it's at the moment, well, what our point was that it's just too cluttered. Too many people are doing, or too many brands are doing that kind of thing. And I think talking to the consumers, people are just feeling overwhelmed about the negativity at the moment, to be honest. It's like, just don't tell me it's so bad. Don't tell me it's so sad what's going on. I know that. It's around me. I get that. Tell me how I can make my life better, or how you can help me to improve things, or how I can make some kind of silver lining out of the situation. So I think it's a balance. Obviously it's about being empathetic and recognizing that it's not so easy. I think the two examples of videos we showed, the one was the bird's eye, and the other one was the compilation at the end there with all the different ads. And I think they're two really good examples. If you look at the somber music, empty space, walking streets with nobody there, it's very depressing, right? Empathetic but depressing. But then you look at the one with bird's eye, which did a really great job, because they're also saying, we get you, we understand that it's tough, you're there and you miss your family, you miss your friends, but we're here to support and help. So it's just a different tone of voice. It's still both are empathetic. If I was the marketer or the advertiser, I would try and give some level of upbeatness or some level of positivity, I guess, wherever possible.
Okay, well, hope that answered the question. Yeah, another one from Dil Navas. Can you detail further about the fear that will divide the society? So in this case, the digital divide.
Okay, so I think the digital divide is what we're finding at the moment. It's more about a bit more about a short term, yeah. So what we're seeing, are particularly like elderly, some people living in certain areas, social classes, people who are not used to dealing with technology. So there is that kind of anxiety and issues going on at the moment. So and I think it's because we've all had to change our lives so fast. Yeah. So we've all had to adapt within, I mean, I talk about our office, Illuminate Asia, even though we've done remote working for a long time, on and off, but never the whole company. Yeah. So we had to, within, a few days, switch everything to not being in office. So it's a very fast process. So I think that's where the tension is there. And I think what we've seen, even across the period of time, we're talking, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, for example, we've seen amongst the consumers we're talking to they've really jumped up in terms of their technology usage and understanding. So I think it's a good thing. What we're also internally working on and discussing is what's it going to look like once the pandemic and social distancing finishes. So how is life going to be then, and how is the use of technology going to be? Which habits are going to stick and which habits are going to kind of go away? When we talked about chaos and discrimination and social divide, I think we were talking more about more on like ethnicity, on that kind of level, the social unrest, that kind of broader scale and longer term. So I hope that's answered your question.
Okay, now the next one is from Claudia. She asked, what about Indonesians' attitude towards education, particularly trust in education institutions during this period of homeschooling and parents also taking part in teaching?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think it's not something that we delved really deeply in. So I just have to say that as an upfront. We didn't ask a lot of questions around that, but I think the sense is that parents especially feel quite ill-equipped. They feel like they don't know this. They're not teachers. They don't know exactly what they should be doing. First of all, are they helping their kids sufficiently? And then, do they have the resources to do that? And then also they're juggling their normal life. So they're juggling having to work, if they're, unless they're housewife, but, having to work, having to deal with the house and so on. So I think there's a real sense that it's really difficult. So we didn't really probe into what education institutions are doing and how they're faring. But I think people are finding it a bit of a struggle, to be honest, at the moment.
Okay. And the next question from Satriawan is about hospitality brand. How to manage hospitality brand in this difficult situation?
Yeah, so that's a really tough one. That's a really tough one. So when you're saying hospitality brands, are you meaning restaurants, or you're meaning hotel, or So I think, I mean, I think I'll look at it on both angles, and we see some examples of good examples and bad examples. I think at the moment it's obviously super tough, and it's super tough to manage the brands right now. But I think certain things that we see some brands doing, which seems to be quite positive, is, for example, if it's restaurants, obviously converting their business model to allow pick up and online delivery and so on. But also enabling, this is one area that we've seen, enabling consumers to help others. So we've seen some brands that are actually asking for or allowing people to buy a meal or buy something for the delivery driver, for example. So that's a way to help consumers help others. It's quite easy for a consumer to do, to just add on another meal or whatever. If you're talking around the hotel space, again, that's super tricky, but we've seen examples of helping, some hotels who are opening up to healthcare workers at the moment, letting them stay either free or very cheap. And then, obviously that will help brand building in the future. There is another example of hotels in other countries that when they're a quarantine hotel, kind of going above and beyond in terms of the level of servicing, offering different initiatives, different programs within that scenario, so that people will, kind of word of mouth, and will come back once the pandemic is over. But really tough category to be working in at the moment, of course.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me try and see if there are any other questions. From Ari, are there certain types of channels which of social media they limit, and which one they prefer? Yeah, talking about the consumers again, in terms of social media, which one they prefer?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a
or which one they use less. Yeah,
that's a good one. I mean, I think what we see, and it's not just from the study, what we see across studies is that for Indonesians in particular, I think Instagram is one very, very prominent, obviously, social media, particularly for some of the housewives and older. I guess Facebook is also still there. Twitter for more of an information gathering exercise. I mean, I think for this question, I can obviously also refer back to some of our team that worked on the project as well. So whether Oki or Kiki or have anything else to add?
Some questions, but unfortunately I got kicked out just now, so I lost some of the questions. But please forward to me the questions now if you have any. I got disconnected. Just anybody have any more questions which perhaps you asked earlier but was not answered? No? Okay. Any more? Well, sorry. Okay, sorry, from Risa Devi, yeah.
Okay.
What should B2B brand do to be part of solution in this pandemic?
Okay, so I think
what
B2B
can they
brand,
do?
Yeah, sure. I think B2B brand, I think it depends on the category again. I think, whether it is about supporting key workers or supporting key sectors, we see some of our clients or some of our colleagues in other B2B companies who are able to, to provide practical support in this instance. I mean, from our point of view, we're also a B2B company, right? And we are helping to try and provide information and insights during this time to help our clients as well. And then also, of course, it's about, not from a branding point of view necessarily, but there are different ways and different organizations to jump in and provide that practical support. I know even the governor of Jakarta has a new initiative where corporates are able to pick out certain regions and help support in various ways. So that might be another way to do that.
Okay, and follow up from that question, Risa was asking, what should the brands do to ensure the brand existence, the continuity of the brand?
That's another tough one, right? I think it's a tough one. I mean, again, I think it depends on which brand it is and which category it is and what you're in. But I mean, obviously, like I said in the presentation, now is not a time just to be quiet. Now is the time that even if sales are down, wherever possible, to still continue to talk and continue to message and continue to connect with your customers and with your consumers, really. So I think that's one strong way. I mean, I guess anyone in business in this environment has to be a bit innovative and look at different strategies, you know, whether it's reworking the types of products and brands that we're offering, whether it's looking at new business models. I mean, I think it's, you know, it is, that is the way to kind of survive, I guess. Of course, it depends. It's very varied depending on category. You know, in this current pandemic, we see some categories are doing quite well. Obviously, some of the, you know, online shopping, some of the, you know, food and beverages are still quite strong. Obviously, you know, things like healthcare, personal care products, like, you know, obviously hand wash and so on. Whereas other categories are completely dire, like obviously, you know, hotel tourism and things like that.
Question pronounced the name wrongly, but she wants to know, will the change in Indonesia consumer behavior be permanent in the future?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and this is something that we didn't include in this particular presentation, but this is something that we as a team at Illuminate Asia, we are going through and we're talking about on a daily basis. We have many discussions on this, and this is something that we're currently doing more analysis around. Because I think, yeah, it's like, what is the, I know this term new normal has been, you know, is quite popular now, but I think that is really, it's a really important thing to consider, because, you know, some behaviors probably will stick and other behaviors perhaps won't. For example, we had one of our respondents was very hopeful that the new kind of level of hygiene and health rituals that people are doing, they're very keen to see that would stay and that would continue. The reason being is because they think it's good for a broader society. And also for a couple of consumers, it's in the back of their mind, is this kind of pandemic thing will potentially happen in the future. So I think, I mean, I think what I'll say to you is watch this space. We're still working on those sorts of questions, and hopefully we can come back with another webinar that focuses specifically on that. But what I do think, and I do strongly believe, is that a lot of the behaviors around use of technology, uptake of technology, will definitely stick, some of it. I mean, not 100%. Obviously, people are not going to stay in their house forever just using Zoom or whatever. But I think a lot of that, I think people are realizing, what we hear from our respondents as well, as people are realizing that actually we can do things in a different way. So you know, even if I speak for myself, you know, I used to always try and go to events, speeches or networking or whatever, and now I find that, well, actually I can do a lot more of that. Currently I can do a lot more, you know, I can jump on webinars and learn and educate myself and interact with people in a far more efficient way than what I could previously, because, you know, you get stuck in the mat chat and you have all of the stuff that goes around it. So I think some of those aspects, I think will stick to a certain extent, and especially, you know, even working from home at least some of the time, I think will definitely stick. But yeah, watch this space. We are, like I said, like Isa mentioned, this is a webinar series that we're just launching now. We're continuing to do different internal researches at the moment, and our plan is to do a webinar like this on a very regular basis. So that will be one of the topics, definitely. So.
If I may add, sorry, this is Haris.
Sorry,
yeah. If I may add on the behavior part, I think behavior is really contextual. So it's a result of different tensions and attitudes within a person. So if you ask whether this behavior will last after the pandemic, I would say some, yeah, but some, again, if they are facing with different contexts, they will have different attitude and resulting in different behavior.
Yeah, correct.
But it's important to understand the context and the tension happening for each of the situation.
Yeah, correct. I do think that people have a wider range of options perhaps now than what they did have, in terms of even things like shopping or, you know, ways of working and so on. So, but we will come back with that as a topic later on.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I will allow one last question because this was forwarded earlier to me. Now, this question is about the tone on social media that resonate better or the best with consumers. So which tone or what tone would resonate well with the consumers out there?
I mean, again, it depends on the social media, but I think, you know, people are accessing social media for a number of reasons. So on the one hand, we talked about escapism. That's a really, really big thing at the moment. So, you know, people are getting bored, they're feeling down, they're feeling frustrated, they're turning to social media or turning to digital gaming, like I mentioned about TikTok and things like that, to have fun, to maybe learn something, but just relax and escape and do something different and just kind of break away from where they're at. So obviously in that kind of scenario, it's got to be, you know, very upbeat. It can be, you know, looking at exploring new things, how consumers are able to, you know, try new things and, you know, have fun and enjoy with it. So I think for the most part that those sorts of areas work really well in the social media. You know, obviously social media is also a source of information for a lot of people. One of the things I'm just again looking in from some of the global stuff is I found that that for Indonesia it seems to be a higher level of information, of kind of serious information from social media compared to some other markets. So I think obviously it depends on the message that you're trying to deliver. If it is a more serious message, you know, around the, you know, the health aspects or other, you know, kind of messages of the pandemic itself, then obviously a more serious factual kind of tones, you know, with supported by evidence and a network would be, you know, or an expert would be really ideal.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar and for all the questions. If there are any other questions that, you know, perhaps we, you know, did not answer just now or address your questions just now, please forward them to us and we are happy to, you know, get back to you on your questions. And do get in touch with any of us if you want to find out more about how we can help your brands. And please don't forget to join us in our next webinar, which is next week. And we will share with you, next week, we will share with you how we analyze Indonesian consumers during pandemic from food and beverage perspective. So we will be sending the invite very soon. So yeah, do check out your the invite in your mailbox. And finally, on behalf of the whole Illuminate team, thank you very much for your participation for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.